All right, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And we have a few folks that have tuned in on Facebook and some in Zoom. So welcome everybody to the final installment of Yestermorrow's Spring Speaker Series on the theme of Design Build for Social Justice. I'm Rachel Wiley. I'm the Student Services Coordinator at Yestermorrow and the host of the series. And I'm tuning in from unceded Abenaki territory in the Mad River Valley of Vermont. A little bit of housekeeping for folks to be able to interact with our speakers tonight. You can ask your questions if you're on Zoom in the Q&A box, not the chat. I won't be monitoring that one. So if you have a question or comment, please put that in the Q&A box. It's a little bit easier to keep track of that way. If you're on Facebook, you can type your questions in the comments and I will field those for you as well. So tonight's presentation is on building for trauma, crisis, and justice. And I'm really excited to welcome our speakers, Needa B. and Ayat Jalal-Bryant from Village Oakland. Village Oakland is a grassroots organization and network of unhoused and housing insecure folks supported by housed allies that is based in Oakland, California on indigenous Ohlone territory. They're a 100% volunteer-run organization that believes housing is a human right and homelessness is not a crime. So with that, I will get the PowerPoint going and let our wonderful speakers take it from here. All right. Do you want me to go to the next slide?
Sure.
As a people help each other, things would happen, things would change. I think there's a solution to this problem. And I think that we need to just start standing up as a people and start helping each other. Stop walking in our neighborhoods and looking at us, looking at people that are homeless like they're a disease. They're not a disease, they're your brother and sister.
It's about the resistance, displacement, protect dignity.
We can go to the next slide. Hi, everyone. Can everyone hear us?
Yep.
Hi, my name's Needa B.
This is Ayat Jalal.
And we're very honored and thankful to be here to share with you the work we do and the vision that we have. And you know, I checked out what your school was about, and you guys are awesome. You are literally the kind of, you know, out the box thinkers we need to solve this humanitarian crisis that is plaguing the United States and that has since the beginning of this country. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So a little bit about what we do. These are the different programs we offer. We started off as Feed the People. The Feed the People existed before the village existed. We call Feed the People our foundational program. It's where we do our food and provision distribution. We share meals. We don't say we, you know, pass out meals. We say we share meals, because again, that's a framing of how do we other the folks that are out here, or do we embrace them as ourselves? And so everything out of Feed the People informs everything the village does, and it's actually informed the creation of the village. So Feed the People existed first for a whole year, but out of that came the village, which was supposed to be a direct action that lasted a weekend, when we kicked it off when Trump got elected for office. And here we are 5 years later. The direct action has become a major, one of the leading service and advocacy organizations for unhoused here in Oakland. And so what people know us for is the Housing and Dignity Build Team, because it's very in your face. We take over public lands that are neglected, empty, filled with trash, and we clear them off and build emergency, temporary, tiny house villages to get people out of the dire conditions that are happening in the streets of Oakland. I don't know how it is with the other cities across the US, but Oakland literally has shanty towns. We are one of the wealthiest. Historically, we've been this very marginalized and deeply neglected community that had, for the longest time, for decades, the reputation of being one of the most violent cities in Oakland. And over the past 15 years, we've seen an influx of wealth, an influx of luxury housing, an influx of jobs that we have never seen before. And none of that is for the people of Oakland. All of that is for people who do not live here yet. But that's where the Housing and Dignity Build Team came up. Was we were tired of politicians ignoring the cries of the people. We were tired of seeing yet another condo go up. And so we took matters in our own hands and started building tiny house villages with services on site. SOS, we provide porta potties, hand washing stations, clean drinking water, and trash pickup services to curbside communities. Word on the Curb is the media component. We create our media. We train unhoused people to be media advocates and media spokespeople. Gas grant, we broker vehicle donations that the public may have and match them with unhoused folks who need specific kind of vehicles. Cardboard and Concrete Collective is our unhoused artist collective. Street Smarts is our Know Your Rights and our skills training and our legal support training program. Hotels Not Graves was a emergency COVID-19 shelter-in-place program that we actually just successfully shut down, I guess 2 weeks ago. Streetcation is the reiteration of that program, where it's not going to be a long-term housing program that gets people into permanent housing, which is what the goal of Hotels Not Graves was. Middle-class folks and even some working-class folks like to take vacations to get away from the daily grind of the rat race. And what folks don't realize is that poor people, homeless people need a vacation from the streets. And so Streetcation offers people a moment of reprieve. It could be just that there's something crazy going on and they need somewhere to go to clear their mind, or they just need a shower, or somebody's trying to get away from an abusive boyfriend or a predator in the community, so they can go into a hotel for a little bit to rethink what their next plans are. Or somebody wants to kick a drug addiction or a substance abuse, but they can't get into it. With addiction, you might have this moment of time where you're ready to kick it, but the detox center doesn't have any beds. And so 3 days later, when they finally let you in, that moment left. And so the idea is with Streetcation, people who are in that moment can get in a hotel for a few days until a bed opens up in the detox center or until the bed opens up in the drug rehab program. And then Fight the Power is where we train unhoused folks to be advocates and policy makers and policy changers, to create legislation and influence legislation so that, as Rachel said, housing is a human right and homelessness is not a crime. Do you have anything?
As far as on the programs, yes, it's very essential during a crisis. It's like you have to realize that people who are thrown out, who are put out there, they need these basic services on the ground, front line, for basics. Your morality, your willingness to succumb to what we call crime element and all other things like that. You become victim to those predatory people who are looking, for those who throw themselves away to, use and feed the people, to give somebody food. Those basic programs, like Needa was saying, was the initial start. Let's feed ourselves, which is the beginning of health and realization that we can do that, take care of ourselves. But through all, yeah, beautiful. I have nothing to add. Nothing to add. Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm talking to builders because the main thing we've run into problem is space. In America, you don't own anything. Even when you own your house, you're still paying mortgage. It's the whole game. But there's such thing as real estate. And unfortunately, in the market, the housing, the crisis that caused this is land development. A lot of the ordinances that were passed stating that humans, the public, like the othering people, public, no longer were allowed to be in public spaces because never mind fitting the problem. And what gentrification, what swept it hard was the fact that these laws and a lot of people who own these buildings, even though they were moving into the areas that had these beautiful people, culture, there's always something going on. It's not drab and boring. They move in and then, they're scared of the people walking on the street. They don't want to see, the cause of that. And literally, when talking to builders, it seems like we have slowly grafted humanity out of this system of existence, of this society. And everything is barred, everything's boarded, everything's railed up. If you that general crisis, that general understanding that I'm not allowed to belong, you being a Black man, understand what that feels like. But we just did that to an entire population of people, who for whatever reasons couldn't keep up, were failed. You have PTSD, you have a lot of rape victims, you have kids coming out of foster care systems who are just simply rejected. There's nothing for them after a certain point. And that understanding, that crisis came with the mind state that they couldn't keep up. That, they couldn't get in where they fit in. No, they were rejected. And a healthy mind kind of wouldn't want to continue in this rat race. And that's the crisis. What another thing I heard my sister saying was that it is the altering of our language, man, strength and blessings for everybody who's willing to open their mind and do that, because we have to see anew. But yeah, those are the programs, and it all starts from being in the trenches, in the fire, and seeing what's needed at that base level. And these are, for lack of a better terms, these are pillars of what we need to restructure and rebuild from, as far as having community as opposed to society, and being human rather than citizens,
You can go to the next slide. And this is, I can do a little background around this. So this video was actually made by this amazing teenager here in Oakland. She graduated actually last year from Oakland School of the Arts, but her name is Deja, and she made this video looking specifically at how gentrification is displacing women of Oakland. And she made it linked to a village that we created in 2018, in fall of 2018, called the Housing and Dignity Village. And it was specifically a clean and sober village of tiny houses and other structures and services for women with families. And that included women with small children, that included women with partners, that included women who had older children that were taking care of them. After we have been up for, I keep in mind, this is a very organized, all of the villages we build are organized, and we, like I said, build them on neglected land or abandoned land that's covered in trash. And we have those sprawling shanty towns. which have apps which are just like total chaos because of the inhumane conditions people live in. And the shanty towns have been allowed to exist and grow for years. Every time we start a village, we get an eviction notice in 2 weeks. And so with this particular village, you'll see some of the images of the eviction. They gave us the eviction notice after 2 weeks, and then we filed a civil rights lawsuit against them and got a temporary restraining order. So we were able to stay open for another month. And then the village, the city told the federal judge that they were going to house all of us. And so the judge said, well, go ahead and you guys are going to get housed. There were 13 of us that lived on that village, including children. None of us were housed. And in fact, all the property that we had, that you'll see them destroying it, we never got any of that property back. And what was left of our property was returned to us a year later, covered in mold and rat feces. So, but we'll go ahead with so this again puts it in context of displacement and gentrification.
There are things like poverty, racism, injustice, but I think if you dig underneath that, if you dig underneath all of that to look for the causes of it, you will find a heart condition. To me, it's a heart condition. It's displacement in its most evil form. My name is Regina Evans, and I'm the owner of Regina's Store Vintage Boutique, which is a social enterprise to help support survivors of trafficking. Gentrification, in a nutshell, is displacement. And I understand that in the course of life, things change, but it's how they change.
Some view it as an opportunity to build up the neighborhood so that the middle class can move in. Those individuals who have lived in that area, who've grown up and made that community what it is, can no longer afford to stay in there. So they are unfortunately displaced.
I think probably within the last year and a half, there have been about 10 Black businesses that have shuttered just in this area here.
So we have a number of families, particularly women with children, who are living in their cars, living on the streets, and we don't really have a family shelter in the city of Oakland. One, their pay level is less than men, and two, because the prices are just rising in Oakland.
I've gotten calls and incidents of girls being trafficked, young girls being trafficked out of the homeless encampments. Like, how much more vulnerable can you be?
Well, this encampment has been around since October 27. Its primary needs are for women and children and families. Basically, we have different organizations that came together, and we decided to make our own idea of what an encampment should look like.
This is our dining area and our kitchen area. And then this is our medical tent. So we provide medical services to the community every Saturday. And our vision is for this whole plot. So everything all the way to Clara Street, this is all a continuous parcel.
Hay muchos, los jóvenes somos de muchas diferentes índoles de sociedad, ya sea también alcohólicos, drogadictos, también simplemente nomás, somos gente que viene de México y no tiene estabilidad porque todo el dinero lo mandan para México, o muchas cosas pasan para que estar uno homeless, ¿verdad? Pero yo no quiero estar homeless así, yo quiero tener otra vez un lugar en la sociedad, yo quiero volver a tener mi casa, un trabajo, yo quiero salir adelante, no me quiero seguir sintiendo como una escoria de la sociedad toda mi vida.
Something of a renegade, the will of a god, the voice in the streets, the heat after the tick, tick, boom. When you hear me speak, I'ma eat every evil that you breathe, though smoke coming out my lips like a dragon coming up on a lip. Watch quick, though I'm a slave to the system. My indecision got me resisting. Call it the wrong in me, call it the fall in me, call it the father in me. You invoking the enemy of enemies that will not fall prey to the capitalistic mental, bankrupting the American dream while American people live out in the streets. Not checking, you don't want this, that. 80 deep at Libby streets, like give my people a plate to eat, a place to sleep, lest I call upon the sound. For in the beginning there was the word, and I was gifted with a silver tongue to lay asunder you foolish bums.
Homelessness is not a crime.
Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime.
This was Housing and Dignity Village, a safe encampment for unhoused women who want to get and stay sober.
Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime. Homelessness is not a crime.
Right now, they are trashing our community garden. So not only was this a curbside community, it was a resource hub for the housed and unhoused neighbors.
Homelessness is not a crime.
Are we going to walk through a change in a compassionate way where we are each other's neighbors, where we're in relationship with people, where we say, what are your needs? What are my needs? Or are we going to walk around with blinders on?
We're getting shut down because we are outspoken and we're advocates not for ourselves, but for everybody else. So they're shutting us down to keep us quiet. But it's not going to work. We're just going to get louder. We can go on the next slide. So one thing is that we need to understand the current housing crisis and homeless state of emergency. And that video, broke that down in terms of, the displacement that's currently happening, which we'll get into in a little bit. But first and foremost, we have to understand that we live in a society that has homelessness embedded in the foundation of the design. The very first time we've ever seen homeless people on this continent was the indigenous people, when their lands were violently taken and their communities and culture was attempted to be destroyed. And so until we first and foremost recognize that, which I think is so awesome with your school, because you guys put that front and center as builders, that you recognize that you're on indigenous land and that this school and the work you guys are seeking to do is embedded within this deep system of oppression. And so that's something, that I think everyone who's building needs to recognize. And then figure out those contradictions as we go along. Did you have anything to say on that piece? We just gave you point by point.
No.
Okay, and then the second thing is that the homeless crisis as we know it today was rooted in the legacy of Ronald Reagan. So there's two predominant stereotypes when people think of homeless people, and that's that all homeless folks are mentally ill or that homeless folks are addicts. And when Ronald Reagan was the president of the US, he shut down all the public mental health facilities across the country. And we had hundreds of thousands of unhoused people literally go into the streets. And that has been what's happening since the 1980s. And that's where that stereotype came from, was from a policy decision to shut down services for unhoused folks and shut down housing. Shut down services for mentally ill folks and to shut down housing for mentally ill folks. The second very violent and insidious policy and program that came out of Reagan's administration was the war on drugs, which we know now was a manufactured war to fund the Iran-Contra war in Iran and was it El Salvador where the conflict was, or was that Nicaragua?
Sure.
It was one of the Central American countries where the U.S. was funding the dictatorships of those countries to oppress popular unrest, and they funded that through drugs.
Nicaragua, Colombia.
Yes, and how that impacted us and where the homeless stereotype came out of that was when the crack epidemic hit in the 80s. First of all, you have to think about where did those guns come from that got flooded into the neighborhoods? Where did the cocaine come from that was imported into the country and then flooded into the neighborhoods? And one thing I was talking about with somebody is that to this day, you have, I think it was you, that we have places that are known drug spots where you have drug dealers selling out front on the block. The cops come by, you were telling me, the cops come by and like,
don't do nothing.
And actually know the drug dealers by name and like acknowledge them, and so this kind of stuff is allowed. But what happened in the 80s was no one really knew what crack was until later, right? Everyone smoked pot, people were taking mushrooms. It was, off of the 1970s, get high and make love, not war movements, and so people were still in that frame of mind. No one thought that something like crack was going to be introduced that was actually systematically and deliberately placed to destroy the ability of any kind of Black power or brown power movement of moving forward. And so what started happening in the 80s is people got hooked on a drug that no one had ever seen before. And so who had a house suddenly didn't have a house because they were so addicted to crack, they were chasing crack and not paying their mortgage. And so you had this massive slew of homelessness that came out of that. And then our final kind of, and so those stereotypes exist for a reason. And yes, there are people who have mental health issues. And yes, there are people who have addiction. And the longer you're out there, even if you're out there and you don't have either of those problems, the longer you're out there, the more susceptible you are to both those conditions. And what we have under gentrification is a whole new face of homelessness. And that's the working class and the world who can no longer afford the cities that once were working class cities, who can no longer get housing. So in 2000, beginning of 2000, because gentrification hit Oakland in 2000 and was like completely like a path had been created by 2005. In 2000, it still cost like $500 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. Today in Oakland, a 2-bedroom apartment, okay, remember we went from $500 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. Today, a 2-bedroom apartment, still janky as it was 20 years ago, no renovation has been made. A 2-bedroom apartment, you're lucky if you can get it for $6,000. So like I said earlier, there's this influx of tech jobs that have come in. There's an influx of high-end boutiques that come in. But the folks who've been here all their lives, those jobs are not for us. And so the cost of living has raised, the market price of housing has raised, and literally it's a train. It's a train track that has been put across our city and other urban cities, and the train has taken off, and we're still standing at the station. And that's kind of what's happening.
Yeah. And to run through on the history of that, it's good you speak on that. When it comes to Panama, and when Ronald Reagan came in, Nancy Reagan, because I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, Nancy Reagan did a drug campaign.
Oh, yeah,
Dare. Now, not only did drug trafficking double through the Panama Canal during Ronald Reagan and triple by the time he was out of office, but during the first year when they were in office, and she did the DARE program. And you go check these statistics. Even though DARE program, she was given a Nobel Prize or something for peace, what have you, teen prostitution had doubled, drug use had tripled, teen pregnancies was way up, juvenile delinquency in schools, and as far as them filling the juvenile centers, the detentional centers, all those things had gone up, double, some of them triple, yet she got a prize, and I don't understand, it seems like that's when everybody started considering, let's tell kids about drugs, maybe they won't do it. Yeah, but they weren't telling kids in all neighborhoods. They was telling us in our neighborhood about each individual drug, how people use it, and a lot of people wind up, oh, now that's a decision. Let me, now that's in their head. You have no protection because of a system, and that's what we must understand. That system killed this. Not only did it double, but then when the housing market boomed, you have to understand that in the Bay Area, I'm not sure about in your area, the price of living, like the sisters said, it went up, it went up, it went up. Right on the end of the dot-com boom, we had a whole lot of people coming out. Everybody was getting money. This is like what 2000 up to 2005 in that same stretch. All this dot-com, everything, everybody was those overnight millionaires became millionaire in a year or so. They wound up rock bottom. What didn't stop was the belief in this tech industry and these high price, this fancy living, this vision that they had for everybody except for the poor, except for the common citizen. They closed out schools and they built jails. Literally, they were arresting people and finding parents for their kids not being in school. And there's no, when we talk about a system that creates it, minimum wage didn't raise for 18 years in the Bay Area. And this is the reason why when UN says specifically Bay Area that it is criminal the way that the local government was treating homelessness, it was because they caused it and it's criminal. 18 years minimum wage did not raise while the rent skyrocketed. And there's no way anyone can buffer from that. And they know that, a fifth-year-old math student can tell you that, social studies student can tell you that. So that, and then on the brink of that with the gentrification, what came in is the right to remove people. And that's the eyesore. Oh, you're hurting money. You're hurting the growth of the economy. No, your economy is hurting humanity. You've gone askew from what we're here for. And a lot of people get it wrapped up in the race. Yes, it is race. I won't even get into that deep thing, but you check history and see on a lot of inventions and everything else. And I mean, everybody is good at something. When you look at the majority of the growth of inventions and a lot of things that really spurred the American economy, the Industrial Revolution, even when you talk about Einstein and Tesla, they weren't from here. Benjamin Banneker, a lot of them went from here. Lewis Lattimore, who really invented light. They weren't from here. America absorbed those people into it and used all of theirs. And it's the same way they've been doing with slaves and with the society in general, as a mode. And what we see from industrial age is now the corporate, where we now become commodities, not pieces and parts in that what we used to call the killing machine, that daily grind, that we know is killing the environment. It's now flipped. It's now a tech thing where, it's now money over people. Not let's forge this society, let's build these bombs, let's be the smartest, let's be the sharpest. No, because your schools would be still being invested in. It's let's get what we can out of the people. And for whatever reason, I don't want to think conspiracy theory, but it seems that the quality of one's heart and the intelligence and strength of the people of this nation is by far, it's the last place, it seems, in money and growth and the inclusion of others, who will in the place game, that apart from humanity, those are put at the top. Gentrification is icing on the cake. After everything was created, okay, well, now let's criminalize them and just move them out of here,
Mm-hmm. We can go on the next slide.
To the gentry.
So going back to, the crisis again, like the slide says, we believe that homelessness is not a problem that needs to be made visible, regulated, or criminalized, which is usually the approaches that people have towards homelessness, is to make unhoused people unseen, treat unhoused people like they're blights, regulate unhoused people in terms of, you can't sit there, you can't lay there, you can't cook your food, you can't accept donations of food from people, and then outright criminalized, because the police is used. Anytime the police is used, no matter how they use it, that is a form of criminalization. And what's really happening is that this is not a problem or an eyesore. This is a humanitarian crisis, a moral crisis, and a political crisis. And why I say that is that, as Ayat just said, is that the humanity of our society seems to have disappeared. And so because of that, we're in a humanitarian crisis. We're not treating people like humans, and we're not acknowledging their basic needs, food, shelter, and clothing, in order to live, water. It's a moral crisis because our politicians are not acting like public servants. They're acting like real estate agents. It's a moral crisis because housed people don't want to be bothered by the most vulnerable people in their community. And it's a political crisis because right now what is moving politics is money. Public land is being sold to the highest bidder. The most expensive housing is being built. In the video, it said that, it had said that how homelessness had jumped from 2016 to 2017. Well, from 2017 to 2019 in Oakland, homelessness doubled. From 2019 to 2021, homelessness has tripled. During that period of time, we as advocates have been able to secure upwards of $650 million to end homelessness. And how do you get that much millions of dollars? And within that period of time, homelessness triples? We don't know people who've been housed, through that money. And so we're actually in the middle of an audit. And the audit is actually showing like, yeah, there's money missing. Millions of dollars is missing. Where'd that money go? During that same period of time, there has been scheduled down the pipeline in the next 5 years is more than 40,000 units of market rate, which means upper middle class or luxury housing. In that same period of time, the next 5 years, we've got 250 to 300 deeply affordable housing that's specifically for unhoused folks. In Oakland, California, we got 14,000 people unhoused. What today? What is 250 units of deeply affordable housing going to do for that 14,000 people? In Oakland, California today, we have hundreds of thousands of empty market rate units and condos, empty, because no one can afford it. However, the city has voted to build another 40,000 of those units. Who's going to move into those? We don't know. And one thing I've heard over and over again by proponents of this model of development is that this is inevitable, that it's a mark of progress. But actually what it is, it's a very racist and classist urban development model that's grounded and rooted in colonialism and totally ignores the people who've been historically marginalized, historically neglected, and historically oppressed and exploited in this country.
Yeah, well, one thing as far as it being a crisis, the one thing I started with first they came for the homeless, and we were in San Francisco. We had to go to jail for no sit, no lie. And it was basically saying that you can't sit or lie. And I mean, and this was my wake up. I mean, I had a long wake up call long ago, because the police, they do not follow what is considered our constitutional right. There's no moral concern. They literally follow city ordinances, which are for the rich and for the money builder. We look at, it was a no sit, no lie. So the police officer told us, we have to get out. We literally had signs out saying 147E, saying that, you're exempt if you're protesting. The guy walks away, go gets another officer. Two of them come over, and I'm like, yeah, so we're not getting up. This is literally the law. This is what you're supposed to uphold. He went back real quick. The sergeant came back and said, I was told to arrest you. Get up. You're going to jail. So, we got kidnapped for 3 days, and we didn't sign any papers. Luckily, had lawyers, and they let us out. And what we quickly realized, especially in San Francisco, is that where they literally remove homeless people from the wealthier districts. They actually have buses that go downtown. We're talking about a humanitarian crisis. I just want to say this, as far as the level, as far as they say it's an ISO, they don't want it. Trust me, it can be. We could help them. I mean, they can cure this thing. They don't want to. It creates a money pit. Like you say, 600 million we advocated for our city to get. Not a penny was used for us. Surprise! All the realists, all the buildings going up. Couldn't find out the mayor is what that was her stronghold. She's in the real estate.
She's a real estate lawyer.
Go figure that. There's no checks and balances again. So you come to a point where this crisis is literally humans. We're back to being commodities. Our government is allowed to, like you say, criminalize, and that's the whole thing. I mean, I can say a whole lot of words. Let's not forget, in every crisis, it's the fact that we feel that our government, number one, are the best to take care of us. I thought my mom was, and whenever she, you know, if not secondary, somebody else in the family. We fail to forget that the federal government, the Federal Reserve, the federals, what we call federales, that's not our government. They literally run our government, own the nation, but they are an entity that are separate from the government and not held liable as the American public is. And changing and altering mode on every level, you know, things need to be stopped, because this crisis, like we said, just like with the drug trafficking doubling and tripling, after the crisis, when the UN decided that it was criminal what our local government was doing, the crisis didn't stop. It almost doubled. So it's blatant. It's blatant. And it, you know, people, it's too much of that cliche of, oh, the government do what they want. We need to stop speaking that. So if that's the truth, then, well, we're in hell. You know, you might as well be in modern day England, where when you got married, the Lord had a chance at your wife before you did, because you were on his land. So, you know.
Yeah, one thing to add before we go on to the next. Not to
go back, but yeah, my bad. The history of real estate, we really have to undo that, you know. We really have to.
So one thing I was going to say before we go on to the next slide, we did a report. I included the link at the end of this slideshow. There's a link with a bunch of reports that I think will be really beneficial for folks to check out if you're feeling the stuff we're talking about. Yeah. But we did a report with the Ron Dellum's Institute for Social Justice. Their name is now Just Cities, and the East Oakland Collective. And basically, it's called, on the link, it's called Housing Oakland Unhoused Now. And we actually showed that the city of Oakland has all the money, all the land, all the resources it needs to end homelessness in Oakland. And we provided several different blueprints of the types of housing and the ways, like literally gave them the blueprints for how to end homelessness. And the city council and the mayor literally just ignored it. They're like, that's nice. So, and then kept on building condos. So, so it is a crisis, but it's a man-made crisis. It's a choice. How governments and municipalities choose to approach or intervene in homelessness is a choice. There's another link that I added on that same end of the presentation, which is the United Nations report. First They Came for the Homeless Here There was able to host the United Nations Rapporteur, Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing in Berkeley, and we helped host them here in Oakland with East Oakland Collective and Love and Justice in the Streets, and RAP in San Francisco, hosted them in San Francisco. But Oakland, this woman spent 6 years traveling all over the world, studying models of adequate housing, or the lack of models of adequate housing. And in the entire world, she said San Francisco and Oakland have the worst human rights abuses towards homeless people due to their approaches, which are a choice. That report is really awesome because she highlights the interventions around the world in some of the poorest countries who have the best solutions and the most humane solutions towards homelessness. So for folks who really are about, you know, trying to figure this out, I really highly suggest that you check out all those reports, because there's some solutions in there. And so we can go to the next slide. All right, so the other piece we want to look at around this housing crisis and the homeless state of emergency is building because of trauma, and which is very much related to gentrification. It's a whole nother layer. But one thing folks should understand is that as many people as there are out in the streets that are homeless, that's how many stories there are of how people became homeless. And it's multi-pronged, it's multi-layered. There's not one kind of monolithic story about how people became homeless. And so it's really important when you're building, trying to build affordable, deeply affordable housing for folks, that you understand these layers, you understand these stories, you understand the setbacks, that the very diverse steps that people have had. Something else is that the trauma that people face has to inform the design of the housing. And that's what we do at the village. Some of the pictures you see down here, the last 3 ones, there's me at a table, and then the 2 other ones, one with the poster board and the other one with people sitting around on the lawn. Before we started, when we first started, that video you saw, none of us knew how to build. We figured, okay, we're just find a and just start building houses like and pretend like IKEA, like anybody who could build this house, because it'll be that easy. So like I said, and we were only supposed to be a direct action over a weekend, but after that initial direct action was destroyed, a movement grew out of that destruction, and we realized, well, actually, let's take this a little more seriously. This isn't just a direct action. Let's really come up with a solution. So one of the things that was informed our solution was that we need a response to this emergency, something immediate, something that can happen overnight. We also need to figure out something that's not long-term, that's not permanent, but transitional, that we get people out of the tents and into like safe and dignified structures that will eventually lead to permanent housing. We didn't do the tiny house movement. We started the tiny house movement here in Oakland. And we didn't do the movement, and we were very clear with our messaging that this is not the solution to end homelessness. This is the emergency intervention until the government provides the adequate permanent housing to move people out of our tiny homes and into the permanent housing. Another piece that is informed by trauma is that the housing and the services around the housing has to be supportive services. If folks are trying to get off drugs and abuse, whatnot, substance or chemical abuse or dependency, that needs to be built into the program. If this is going to be a tiny house village for people who are fleeing domestic violence, that needs to be built into the program. If this is for senior citizens who were trying to get out of tents and into something stable and dignified, that needs to be, those services need to be built into the village. And so that's really important. It actually even came, and that's about designing the villages, but it also came out with our tiny houses. A lot of architects and construction workers, when they first kind of learned about us and wanted to volunteer, got frustrated with us because, our houses, we were following the ADU codes of Oakland. And when we started this in 2017, there was literally one ADU code. That was it. And the only code on the books for ADUs, the accessory dwelling units, in-law homes in the backyards, was that it could be no bigger than 120 square feet. So we built our tiny homes based on that only single ADU unit. We're now in 2021. There is a book about this thick, a book of every single ordinance and fee and fine and license and permit that you have to be able to do and accomplish and jump over to build an ADU in your backyard. So when we started this, our hope was that, wow, maybe people will realize that they could just build an ADU in their backyard and house somebody who's homeless. Our local government stopped that. They're like, wait, we can make money off of this. Let's make this as hard as possible and make a bunch of money off of this. So the ADU option literally is no longer an option. It's not a solution. It is impossible to get an ADU unit built in the city of Oakland, and it took just a handful of years to do that. So we built our houses 120 square feet based on that, and we built them no higher than 10 feet tall, so that if we had a forklift houses, we were within the range of being able to forklift a structure without getting a special permit. Our houses, though they're small, they have 2 doors, a front door and a back door, and they have 5 windows. And so architects and construction workers would be like, what are you doing? And it was like, a lot of folks on the streets have been in prison, or they've been through juvenile hall, or they were institutionalized in some way or form. And our housing design, though it does not make sense to the average builder, it makes total sense to someone who's been in a jail cell. It makes total sense to someone who's got paranoid schizophrenia and needs a way out every single time. So things like that come up. And we, like the pictures on the bottom, we spent 8 months doing surveys across Oakland to find out. The 3 questions were, what do people want in an emergency transitional tiny house? What do people need? And there were 3 questions that were framed all the other questions. What do people want? What do people need? And I think what kind of support would be necessary to get you off your feet. And so based on that is how we designed tiny homes. We had 4 different versions of it from that one iteration of surveys we did. And we surveyed more than 1,000 people, or was it 800? It was between 800 to 1,000 people we surveyed across Oakland. And that also informed the designs of our villages based on what the target population would be that's going to be served by it. Anything to add to that?
I had something I can't remember.
No?
Okay. Well, all right. No, this is one thing on running, just real quick. Trauma. As far as trauma, we have to understand that once you get people, well, you say you can build people houses, because we ran into the problem where, we build houses, we're building houses, and that same element came back in. When you take people out of crisis, like the sister was saying, you have to know what put them in there. Everyone had their own mind prisons, and it's hard just putting people together. What we run into, just like them creating a book to illegalize, what we're doing, people taking care of themselves, like to, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They not only in addition to that, when it comes to the crisis, they did the same thing with the tiny homes, where now they took something that the American people need, and it's supposed to be our government. We used to tell them what we need, tell them what to change, and they would change it. Now they change what they want because, money in the pocket, whatever, and we have hell to go through trying to ask them to switch it back. That needs to flip-flop. And the crisis is that right there. Our local government, we need to switch that. If you're a land developer, or if you're building, to set into the mode, try with it within your laws, within the parameters, because there's a lot of things that designers or land developers come in and they don't want this here, they want that removed, to come in and to insist on a more righteous way, more attainment to maybe to the Constitution, maybe to a moral code. If you ever grow to have the power to do so, if you ever sit in a legislation room, in a boardroom, and it's over land development or how something's going to be for a housing community or development, talk to the people who are there, empower people on the street. Just like I say, go out and ask them. We've been building houses. You'll be amazed. The one thing that this crisis and the trauma is of being thrown away, and we forget that, is that people are not worthless. I myself, I've been reading blueprints since I was 17, cabinet maker and a lot of other things. There's a lot of people out there, like when the sister gave the call out, the real builders show up. We build according to specs, according to code. And in this trauma, it need not be people with a whole lot of money coming in and just decide, let me run with it because I'm gonna get more money. The mode need be, I can sustain myself, through a business that actually is geared towards sustaining humanity, because we can't fight for the basics of life. We will never be stronger than a citizen or a clone. Real quick, there's trauma. We have layers to go through. There are 4 pillars of existence for manhood to evolve. Men, woman, that include womb, man with man. There is food, shelter, and clothing, so that you can have dignity and right and some self-respect, so you can fight for freedom, justice, and equality. You can, by a little bit more, envision yourself somewhere else, go teach, learn, and obtain knowledge, understanding, and hopefully wisdom, in your life, that you'll see what's more worth it, and possibly enlightenment, and evolve into knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Not knowledge, wisdom, and understanding, but to be able to experience peace, love, and harmony. And these have been pillars of humanity in so many ways. It's money, and that mode needs to go. And that's what is before every builder and every engineer. What I do hopefully will be good for 3 to 7 generations down the line, or don't do it.
All right, we can go to the next slide. All right, so finally, we build for justice. And there's the basic framework for that is that we need to stop, we have, like I said earlier, how we've all said is that there are communities within the United States that have been historically oppressed, historically marginalized, historically left out and neglected, and historically exploited. And this is all coming to a head in the millennium under gentrification. And so we need to make a huge paradigm shift as builders to not be worried about looking at housing as a commodity, as a profit-making mechanism, but looking at it and understanding that it is a human right, that a human cannot exist and survive. You cannot have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if you don't have a place to call a sanctuary. It is impossible.
Well, you get dignity to do so.
Yes. Another paradigm shift we need to have is, rather than be driven by profits, rather than be driven by who's going to pay the most money, how can I make the most money? We need to be driven and guided by equity, going back to who has been pushed out, who historically has not been able to maintain themselves in society, who cannot pull up themselves up by their own bootstraps, and why not? And then just let that guide our decision towards creating access to a human right of housing. And then another form of justice too, especially in this millennium, is that rather than trying to figure out all the ways to cut costs so that you can make even more profit, we actually need to be more worried about how do we cut down our carbon footprint. And so the village tries to look at that by providing solar power instead of trying to utilize electricity, by building solar showers, by building bicycle powered washing machines. There's this idea of cob or adobe that we've been able to utilize on a couple of our builds. But really, utilizing the resources around us that are not going to add to the destruction of Mother Earth, which ultimately is our own destruction. Like, we really are in this moment historically, politically, and economically to really shift everything. The fact that this housing crisis and this homeless crisis is happening across this country, it's really our moment to kind of to figure out what the heck we need to do to stop what we're doing, and think and be a different way, think of a better way to exist.
Yeah. And it can't be by job. If you go as far as equity, if you go and give people, real quick, I won't get into that. 48 got a lot on my head. So when it comes to changing and altering that mode, we're just now getting into being a nonprofit. I've been president of a nonprofit. Had business. Queens had business. It's time when we need to shift the mode. And actually, as land developers or as builders, as engineers, you go in and do housing complexes and communities and things to seed in and to say that, this has to be this cost. Because from the other side, you can chop away at that wall that separates, humanity from another and from our forward existence, if we were allowed to evolve together. Being a communal species, we have to evolve. So when it comes to it, I don't know, go at the government, go at the laws. You have the money, if you have the power, go at the laws and say, no, housing is a human right. Look at our constitution, for the well-being of existing as communal beings, we must have a place there where we can commune in peace. And that is a living, that is a roof over our head. Cite that. They have millions of lobbyists, corporations. Every time, like you say, the book went from 3 rules to a book like that for building little houses in the back for people. We need people on the other side who aren't willing to, unless, business is right for humanity. The same way we looked and wanted money, like that paradigm shift. It has to be for another mode, because you're going to get, like we say on the street, you're going to get your money anyway if it's a good product. If you're selling something, ain't no reason to beat nobody on the head or nothing, And if you think 3-7 generations down the line when you're doing those decisions, because you can put those because I'm not forgetting who I'm talking to. These are students. Who knows where you're going to be? Hopefully you'll be at the helm. Do not forget, and with your constituents, this is some bullshit. How can we alter this mode and let our generation break through? And it's literally going to have to be, we choose to do business this way. We are making allowance for humanity. We're not trying to step on humanity for our own allowance. And it'd be too many words trying to explain that. But, please, envision something greater than money,
Yeah.
And support the village, because literally we have people get like right now, what was the highest? People are being paid like up to 20 something, $17,000 per house, and we build our tiny homes from $21 to $2,500. People have given $1 million contracts, and literally are empowering gangs and other stuff. But I don't know, oddly enough, white person gentrifier who learned the skill of Adobe, which is the mud roof, went to Kenya and learned that, and came for free and came back out here. And now I don't know, is in, you know,
he's making
advertising, making money, and he lives in Petaluma, but he's part of $1 million. Look at what was it? The Guardian just had a great article about it. It's called The Miracle Village. Unfortunately, yeah, child trafficking and other things. Yeah, blessed love. Watch out who you empower, man, and not those who are in the business of making money or standing or having a career. You know, because when homelessness goes, the money dries. So that's the wrong way to get into this, you know?
Yeah, I want to speak on that.
Yes, please.
I have so many people, at gentrifiers specifically, who have called me being like, how do I make a career shift and do what you're doing? And I'm like, career? This is not my career. I have a career. I have a job. I am a businesswoman. I have a catering service. This is not a career. I don't want this to exist for the next 40 years. I want this to be over. You know, we have, and then because there's this influx of millions of dollars coming in, that's exactly what is happening. People who have never been unhoused before, people who are not from this community, and I'm sure it's happening across the country, have suddenly made a career change. And they're paying themselves to serve homeless people. But as long as homelessness exists, they are embedded in making sure that homelessness homelessness continues so that they continue to get a salary. And that's just super problematic. That is not the mode that we are putting a call out for. This is not a career. This, like, again, is a human rights crisis. And we need humanity to stand up and end it because our government won't. And when we start talking about turning homelessness into our careers, then we're actually being just as oppressive and exploitative as our government. Yeah. And let's go to the next slide. Our cat has something to say. All right, so bottom line, what do we need to get out of this homeless state of emergency and an affordable housing crisis? I believe the students at your school are perfect for this. We need people who can build immediately the emergency piece. So we need stuff that is not your usual brick and mortar kind of housing. We don't need the usual stock of residential housing. We need something different that will go up immediately. In that report about the House Oakland's Unhoused Now, we're looking at container houses. We're looking at full-blown tiny houses, not just the kind of tiny houses we build. So we build one-room houses with lofts, and then build communal kitchens and communal bathrooms and communal showers so that the community is intact. It allows for people, that kind of thing allows for people to be in community with each other, but it also allows for like an immediate form of adequate shelter to come up. But it's not, like, again, it's not permanent. And what's happening in Oakland right now is folks have jumped onto this tiny house movement that is not meant to be permanent. Like I said, there are tiny houses there that can be permanent. That's not what we built. We built something that is for the emergency. And now everyone and their mama wants to build these tiny houses, and that's what they think the solution is. So they just want to keep people in the tiny houses in perpetuity. These houses don't have bathrooms. We have communal bathrooms. These houses don't have kitchens. We have a communal kitchen. That's not a solution. That's not where the funds and the focus needs to be. The funds and focus need to be on the permanent housing with a full-blown kitchen where I can have some privacy, you know? So, but we need people to think outside the box and to do so. And that whatever transitional emergency housing we build in this moment, it has to be, from the jump, it has to be connected to deeply affordable housing that the poorest of the poor can afford. And so one thing I want to speak on is this idea of affordable housing. And it's a federal government definition, as I'm sure most of you all know. And the affordable housing piece is based on the current market rate, which means it's not a fixed figure. It moves and sways with the market, and which is where gentrification has screwed us all. So if the median market rate continues to go up with more condos, with more expensive units, that means the affordability rate goes up with it. So here in Oakland, California, in the year 2000, if you were making $10,000 or $12,000 or less, you would qualify for affordable housing. Today in Oakland, if you're making almost $90,000, you qualify for affordable housing. And guess who's getting those affordable housing units? Guess who's getting the flyers for it? Guess who's getting the marketing materials for it? It's not the people who are still at $10,000, $12,000 a year income. It's the folks who are at the $1,000, $80,000 income, folks with the jobs. And so that is on a federal level, that formula needs to be reworked. We can no longer go by affordable housing. And if we're going to continue to go by that language, then that means we need to be asking for something different, not affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. What we figured out here in Oakland is that for us, that means something 30% below the MRI, the median rate of the market. So that's really what people want to look at, is looking at 20% to 30% below the MRI is the kind of housing we need to get out of this crisis. So here's the links for the reports. The first one was the report we worked on with the Dellums Institute and East Oakland Collective, where we show a blueprint, several blueprints, and all the sources of funding and all the sources of land that the city and the county government could actually end homelessness within 6 months in the city of Oakland. Ignored. Maybe somebody on this who watches this presentation might want to utilize some of those ideas and implement them, in your own community, because we believe it can work. The next link is for the United Nations report. Again, that's an amazing report. It was very gratifying here in the Bay Area. So many of us are painted by our government officials as being troublemakers, as being crazy, as not knowing what we're talking about, as being bull-faced liars. But when the United Nations comes in and does a full-blown report that repeats everything that you've been claiming is wrong, it was gratifying in a really sad way. It was gratifying. Causa, Justa, Just Cause, they are a leading tenants' rights organization here in Oakland, and they created a report in 2018 about development without displacement. They worked with the Alameda County Department of Public Health, and why this report is amazing is it frames gentrification as a public health issue, that the actual model of gentrification is creating a public health crisis. So that's a really interesting framing. And I think what was laid out in that report, I think COVID showed even deeper that housing wasn't just a human right, but it was a public health measure to keep the disease from spreading amongst people who live curbside. And so, yeah, the COVID pandemic just further showed what we've been saying, is that it's a human right and a human need that needs to be satisfied, not just because, people don't want to see homeless people in the neighborhood, not just because folks are being forced to defecate in the street, but because it could actually spread diseases if people are not properly housed. And then the final report link on there, the Urban Habitat and East Bay Community Law Center, came together to, and I think it was called Rooted, what's it called? Rooted in Home. The name of their report was called Rooted in Home. And they look at different housing efforts to basically put a dent in gentrification and homelessness. And they looked at different folks who are actually doing the work. The Village is one of the groups that they featured on the report, but they've got folks in LA, they have folks in Seattle. It's a wonderful report to look at the different innovative solutions that are happening in real time to try to make a dent in this crisis. And so we wanted to end this off with a challenge to all of you brilliant students, all you brilliant designers and builders and engineers and architects and urban planners and do-it-yourself folks and visionaries, that you guys are the next generation of builders who are going to build the infrastructure of our communities. And we want to challenge you to build towards something that's going to be reclaiming our collective humanity. We want to challenge you to build for a future where every single human will have a place that is called home, and a home that is safe, a home that is secure, a home that is stable, regardless of where your choices in life or circumstances beyond your control may have found you. We want to challenge you guys to build with compassion for the most vulnerable, including Mother Earth, meaning that the final part is that you build in partnership with the most impacted. That when you build, if you're going to build for unhoused people, have unhoused people be part of the planning and design of that from the jump. Don't tokenize and just have people come in for a one-day survey, or have people come in and, you know, ask them a couple questions. No, make unhoused folks part and parcel to the central planning and design of your project. First of all, it would be successful if you do it. And second of all, it's just the right thing to do. I mean, if you put that lens on any kind of social ill, right? If we're looking at racism, you want to talk to the people most impacted by racism to understand how it's impacting them. If you're talking about patriarchy and sexism, you want to talk to women and have them part of the to end patriarchy. We don't feel depressed. You don't want a group of men trying to figure that out. Sorry, y'all can't. Love you, you can't. You know, you can't have a group of white folks to kind of really figure out how are people of color, Black people, indigenous people impacted by racism. You need to have those folks in the room to really do a holistic approach and have a successful holistic solution. So those are our challenges to y'all. And I don't know if I have another slide. I think it's the last slide after this. So yeah, we just wanted to thank you guys for having us. You know, keep on doing this wonderful work you're doing. Stay grounded in justice. Stay grounded in humanity. If any of you are in the Bay Area or plan to be in the Bay Area, come see us. Come join us. We need builders like you.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Come put hands together, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't mind real builders talking with us. We, like the sister said, you know, we'll consult and everything else. It's the people coming in looking for money, you know. Yeah, and that's the challenge, you know, do that because, you know, you in general, we all who push forward, who change from the altar, freedom fighters are social engineers. You know, we're literally trying to rephase, not going through a phase, we're really trying to reset, you know, the mode of existence. And that isn't, you know, as far as building, there's this new thing going on where the corporation, you know, they own the houses that you live in and your landlord is your boss. That is not technology, that's not advancement. That is a more prettier chain than my people had to face. You know, and please don't do it and don't send humanity down that rabbit hole. You know, people need to be empowered. Communities is a working function of our existence of communal need one to another. You know, not for our belief in our false sense of security or identity that label, a paycheck, or some type of title gives us. You know, it's what we are to one another that we can't lose hold of. So yeah, don't build in that mode. You know, it has to stop. It has to stop. You know. Yeah. Blessings and respect, you know, to all.
Yeah, I want to just, you know, end it off with saying that, you know, the Occupy Wall Street movement that happened 9 years ago, that it was very clear across the world that this system doesn't work for the 99%. Yes. And for the planet and for the future. And I feel like we didn't heed that call that was made out 9 years ago. And here we are today, worse off than we were. You know, the foreclosure of houses and the predatory loans that families were being given was what sparked off that movement. And we did not stop, we did not change, we did not learn. We are worse off than we were when people were screaming about their rights to having housing. And we know that indigenous people around the world have been telling us that this system does not work for them, for us, for the planet. They've been saying this for hundreds of years, and it's just really time for us to stop and to change the paradigm. And you guys are in a position, and your calling is in a place to actually make that change happen.
Yeah,
and one last thing I wanted to say, we do have our PayPal link here. So all of us are volunteers. We're our leadership is Unhoused. Both Ayat and myself are both Unhoused. He's been Unhoused for 16 years. I've been Unhoused for 3 years. When I started this organization, this work, I was not Unhoused, but I was very insecure. I knew that I was a paycheck away from being homeless, and that's exactly what happened. And again, all the money you send us goes straight to the people. It goes straight to the work. It gets people what they need, whether it's a porta potty or a tiny house or a hotel room, or an Uber to their court date to fight an eviction. But we don't get paid to do this because, again, this is a humanitarian crisis, and we don't want to do this for a living. We want this to end.
Yeah, thank you both so much. This was I grew up in California, so like I have a certain perspective, but I'm so deeply appreciative of the way that you framed it, and as the humanitarian crisis that it is, and also to really anchor in the needed shifts from profit and progress and new and whatever, to trade that in for putting humanity first, for putting community first, for not making a career out of something that is such a traumatic and difficult situation, but to instead, not do it for the money, but do it because we have to do it as fellow human beings to support each other. And I really appreciate all that you both have shared tonight. Let me stop this so I can see you better. And thank you deeply for sharing this work. And I really look forward to seeing how we can collaborate in the future. I know we have we have lots and lots of alumni from all over the country. So I'm sure there's some in Oakland or in other parts of California that we can, if they don't already know about you and what you're doing, be like, hey, go check out these awesome people doing this very needed work. So thank you both so much. And yeah, I will hope to be in touch soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Rachel. Thanks for reaching out.
Thank you for everybody. Thank you for, and Rachel, I say we do a lot of work. Thank you for being a gatekeeper, because these are our windows. If we don't have somebody to open that, a lot of people wouldn't know what we do.
Yeah,
so thank you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. It's the smallest thing I can do.